August 8, 1941. Bilyivka, Ukraine. A young woman lies in the dirt, frozen, a rifle pressed against her shoulder. She's been in this exact position for 6 hours. She doesn't move. She doesn't breathe heavy. 400 meters away, 2 Nazi officers walk across open ground, confident, casual. She exhales slowly. 2 shots, 2 bodies. But this isn't a trained military sniper with years of experience. This is a 24-year-old history student. 4 days ago, she was studying for university exams. 3 days ago, she had no rifle, just a single-hand grenade. 2 hours ago, a young soldier she'd befriended was shot through the head right next to her. And now? Now she just killed 2 men at a distance most marksmen couldn't dream of hitting. Those 2 kills were the beginning. By the time the Germans finally stopped her, she would have 309 confirmed kills. 36 of them would be enemy snipers who came specifically to hunt her. The Germans would know her name. They would offer her chocolate, an officer position, anything to get her to defect. And when that didn't work, they would threaten to tear her into 309 pieces, the exact number she'd killed, and scatter them to the winds. How did a divorced teenage mother working in a factory and studying history at night transform into the deadliest female sniper in history, a woman so feared the Nazis hunted her specifically, and so celebrated that Eleanor Roosevelt became her closest friend? To understand how Lyudmila Pavlichenko killed 309 German soldiers in less than 2 years, you need to understand where she was and what she was fighting against. June 22, 1941. Operation Barbarossa. Hitler violates the non-aggression pact and launches the largest invasion in human history. 3 million Axis personnel, thousands of tanks and aircraft, all flooding into Ukraine. The Soviet Union is not ready. They have the largest army in the world, but they don't have enough rifles. They don't have enough ammunition. And the Germans are advancing so fast that entire Soviet divisions are being encircled and destroyed before they can even organize a defense. But there was a problem. The Red Army needs snipers, desperately. In urban warfare, in siege situations, a single skilled sniper can do the work of an entire platoon. They can kill officers, destroy morale, and hold entire sections of the front line. On one side, the Wehrmacht and Romanian forces, battle-hardened, well-equipped, advancing rapidly toward Odessa, the Soviet Union's most important port, on the Black Sea. On the other side, hastily trained Soviet defenders, many with minimal combat experience, some with no rifles at all, and among them 2,000 women who volunteered as snipers. Only 500 of those women will survive the war. That's a 75% casualty rate. It was David versus Goliath. And worse, the environment was brutal. Snipers don't fight from safety. They operate in no man's land, the space between enemy lines, sometimes 1,000 feet ahead of their own units. They lie motionless for 15, 18, sometimes 20 hours without moving, eating only bread and water, one wrong movement away from death. The average lifespan of a Soviet sniper? 3 weeks. This wasn't just dangerous. It was a death sentence. And in the middle of that crisis was Lyudmila Mikhailovna Belova. If you saw her in a photograph in 1941, you wouldn't think she was a soldier. You'd think she was, well, exactly what she was. A university student, a young woman studying history, someone who wanted to be a teacher. Lyudmila was born on July 12, 1916, in Bila Tserkva, a small Ukrainian town south of Kiev. Her father was a locksmith. Her mother was a teacher. They weren't wealthy. They weren't connected. When Lyudmila was 14, the family moved to Kiev looking for work. It was 1930. The Soviet Union was industrializing at breakneck speed. Lyudmila, still a child, went to work at the Kiev Arsenal, a weapons factory, as a metal grinder. During the day, she operated heavy machinery. At night, she went to school, and then, at age 15, she got pregnant. She married the father, a 25-year-old medical student named Alexei Pavlichenko. She gave birth to a son, Rostislav. and within months the marriage collapsed. At 16, she was divorced, back living with her parents, raising a baby, working in a factory during the day, and attending night school. Most people would have given up on their dreams right there. Lyudmila didn't. So how did a divorced teenage mother working a factory job become the deadliest female sniper in history? It started when she was 14, shortly after moving to Kiev. She was walking past an Oso shooting club, a Soviet paramilitary organization that taught marksmanship to civilians, when she heard a boy inside bragging about his shooting scores. That was enough. Lyudmila was fiercely competitive. She'd been a tomboy her entire childhood, constantly trying to prove that girls could do anything boys could do and do it better. She walked into that shooting club, enrolled herself, and started training. And she was good. Better than good. By the time she was a teenager, she'd earned her Voroshilov Sharpshooter Badge, a prestigious civil marksmanship award, and a marksman certificate. Now, if you've never done competitive marksmanship, you don't understand how difficult it is. At 400 meters, the distance of her first 2 kills, a human target is the size of your thumbnail at arm's length. You're not just aiming, you're calculating wind drift, bullet drop, your own heartbeat. A slight twitch of your finger, a moment of impatience, and you miss completely. So how do you hit a target that small? First, you learn to control your breathing. You fire between heartbeats. You wait for the exact moment when your body is completely still. Second, you learn patience. You don't take the shot when you want to. You take the shot when the shot is ready. Third, you disappear. You become part of the environment. You don't think about time. You don't think about discomfort. You become the rifle and the target and nothing else. You become part of the landscape. You disappear. The Soviet shooting club taught Lyudmila marksmanship. The factory taught Lyudmila discipline, working 12-hour shifts without complaint, doing what needed to be done. Kiev University taught Lyudmila strategy. She enrolled in 1937 to study history. She learned about military campaigns, about great battles, about how wars are won and lost. But that factory floor, those long nights raising a child alone, that constant need to prove herself, that taught Lyudmila survival. The shooting club made her a marksman, but survival made her a killer. In 1937, at age 21, Lyudmila Pavlichenko enrolled in Kiev University to study history. She wanted to be a teacher, maybe a scholar. She competed on the university track team as a sprinter and pole vaulter. She studied Latin and English. She was writing her thesis on Bogdan Khmelnytsky, a 17th-century Ukrainian military leader. She also enrolled in the Red Army's 6-month military sniper school, just in case. For 4 years, she lived this double life. History student by day, sharpshooter in training by night, raising her son on weekends. And in each of those contexts, Lyudmila used the same skills she'd learned in that shooting club at age 14. The Red Army taught her tactics, but the shooting club had taught her patience. And on June 22, 1941, when she was 24 years old and in her 4th year of studies, those skills would be put to the ultimate test. That morning, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa. 3 million soldiers, the largest invasion in history. Lyudmila didn't hesitate. She was one of the first volunteers at the Odessa recruiting office. She walked up to the desk and said she wanted to join the infantry. The recruiter looked at this young woman, a university student, a mother, and he laughed. "You should be a nurse," he said. Lyudmila said no. He insisted. "This is combat. This is the front line. You're not suited for—" She pulled out her Voroshilov Sharpshooter Badge and her marksmanship certificate and placed them on the desk. The recruiter stopped laughing. But he still didn't believe her. So they gave her a test. They took her to an observation point overlooking the front line. They handed her a rifle, and they pointed to 2 Romanian soldiers, working with the Germans, about 400 meters away. "If you can hit them," the observer said, probably thinking she'd refuse, "you're in." Lyudmila didn't hesitate. 2 shots, 2 kills. She was accepted into the Red Army's 25th Rifle Division, the Chapayev Division, as one of 2,000 female snipers. But here's the thing, she didn't get a rifle. The Soviet Union didn't have enough weapons. So Lyudmila Pavlichenko, a certified marksman who'd just proven she could kill at 400 meters, was given a single RGD-33 hand grenade and assigned to dig trenches. She spent weeks watching the battle unfold with one grenade in her hand, and then, in late July, a comrade near her position was severely wounded by shrapnel. As medics carried him away, he handed Lyudmila his Mosin Nagant Model 1891 bolt-action rifle. Finally, she had a weapon. On August 8, 1941, she was positioned near Belyaivka with her new rifle. She was with a young soldier she'd befriended. A nice, happy boy, she'd later say. They were setting up their positions when a shot rang out. The boy was killed instantly, shot through the head, right next to her. Lyudmila froze, paralyzed, unable to raise her weapon, and then something inside her snapped. After that, she later said, nothing could stop me. That same day, August 8, 1941, Lyudmila Pavlichenko got her first 2 official kills. 2 German scouts were trying to reconnoiter the area, probably sent forward after the artillery barrage to see if anyone had survived. They were wrong. Lyudmila took them both out at 400 meters. She called it her baptism of fire. For the next 2.5 months, Lyudmila fought in the siege of Odessa. She would leave her camp before dawn and move to advanced positions close to enemy lines. Sometimes she'd be positioned 600 to 1,000 feet in front of her own unit, in no man's land, alone, and she'd wait. She'd lie in the dirt for 15 hours, sometimes 18, sometimes 20 hours without moving, eating only bread and water, watching, calculating, waiting for the perfect shot. The slightest twitch may mean death, she later wrote. And here's the thing about Lyudmila that made her different from other snipers. She wasn't just shooting, she was hunting. Just as she'd learned patience in the shooting club, she'd learned to disappear, to become part of the terrain, to think like her target. German soldiers would walk within 50 meters of her position and never see her. She racked up kills methodically, officers first, take out the leadership and the unit falls apart, then machine gunners, then enemy snipers who were hunting Soviet positions. By the end of August 1941, just 28 days after her first kill, Lyudmila Pavlichenko had 100 confirmed kills. She was promoted to senior sergeant, but the Germans were learning about her. They started sending their own snipers specifically to hunt her down. One incident, she described later, 5 German soldiers with submachine guns set a trap for her along a road. They waited in position, knowing she'd come through. But Lyudmila detected the trap. I got into a position where their bullets couldn't reach me, she said, and poured lead into what became a trap for them. She killed 3 soldiers in seconds. As the others ran, she killed a 4th. Then she picked up their submachine guns and walked back to base. This wasn't warfare. This was a chess match where every wrong move meant death. And Lyudmila was winning. By October 1941, when Odessa fell to Romanian and German forces, Lyudmila had 187 confirmed kills. 187 kills in 2.5 months. Her unit was evacuated by sea to Sevastopol on the Crimean Peninsula. The city was already under siege. German and Romanian forces surrounded it. They had superior numbers, superior artillery, superior air support. The fighting in Sevastopol would last 8 months and result in massive Soviet casualties. And it's where Lyudmila's reputation would transform from skilled sniper to lady death. Because in Sevastopol, she started counter-sniping. Counter-sniping is the most dangerous job a sniper can have. You're hunting someone who's hunting you, someone with the same training, the same patience, the same will to survive. It's a duel. And in Sevastopol, Lyudmila would fight 36 of these duels. She won all 36. One of those duels lasted 3 entire days. 3 days of lying in position, holding still for 15-20 hours at a stretch, eating nothing, barely drinking, waiting for the enemy sniper to make one mistake, one twitch, one moment of impatience. That was one of the tensest experiences of my life, she later recalled. For 3 days, neither sniper could get a clean shot. They were both too good, too patient, too well hidden. But on the third day, her opponent made one move too many, one shot, one kill, and the duel was over. Why was Lyudmila so effective? Because she wasn't fighting like a soldier. She was disappearing like she'd learned in the shooting club. She was thinking strategically, like she'd learned studying military history. She was surviving like she'd learned on the factory floor and raising a child alone. She had spent years learning to stay invisible to targets in a shooting range. Enemy snipers? They were easy. But there was a problem, a personal one. At age 25, during the siege of Odessa, Lyudmila had married a fellow sniper named Alexei Kitsenko. For a brief moment, there was happiness. The honeymoon had a positive effect on my shooting, she later said, but this was war, and war doesn't allow happiness. March 1942, Sevastopol. Lyudmila and Alexei were operating together. Snipers often worked in pairs, one shooting and one spotting, when a mortar shell exploded near their position. Alexei was hit, mortally wounded. Lyudmila dragged him back from the battlefield, trying desperately to save him. He died a few days later in the hospital. The war had just become personal. By May 1942, Lyudmila's confirmed kill count had reached 257. She was promoted to lieutenant. The Southern Army Council officially cited her for her kills. But with that recognition came a new level of danger. The Germans knew about her now. They knew her name. They knew her reputation. And they wanted her dead. German radio operators started broadcasting messages over loudspeakers, trying to reach Soviet positions. Lyudmila Pavlichenko, come over to us. We will give you plenty of chocolate and make you a German officer. Lyudmila ignored them. The messages became more aggressive. Lyudmila Pavlichenko, we know where you are. Surrender now. She kept killing. By June 1942, her total confirmed kills had reached 309. 36 of those were enemy snipers. 100 were officers. And then the German messages changed from bribes to threats. If we catch you, we will tear you into 309 pieces and scatter them to the winds. When Lyudmila heard that threat, she smiled. They even knew my score. But on June 15, 1942, the Germans finally got close. Lyudmila was in position during heavy fighting when a mortar round exploded nearby. Shrapnel hit her in the face. She was wounded, bleeding, but still alive. The Soviet High Command immediately ordered her evacuation, not because her wound was life-threatening, though it was serious, but because she'd become too valuable to risk. She was a living legend, a propaganda asset, the most successful female sniper in history. If she died, Soviet morale would collapse. So they extracted her by submarine from Sevastopol, got her to Moscow, and put her in a hospital for a month. When she recovered, they didn't send her back to the front. They promoted her to major, and they gave her a new mission: go to America and convince them to open a second front against Germany. September 27, 1942. Lyudmila Pavlichenko arrived in Washington, D.C. She was 26 years old. She'd been wounded 4 times in battle. She'd killed 309 enemy soldiers. She'd lost her husband 3 months earlier. She was suffering from what we'd now recognize as severe PTSD and shell shock. And the American press wanted to know if she wore lipstick. Lyudmila became the first Soviet citizen ever received by a U.S. president when Franklin D. Roosevelt welcomed her to the White House. Eleanor Roosevelt hosted her for breakfast. The First Lady was fascinated by this young woman who'd done so much in what was considered a man's field. She invited Lyudmila to tour America with her, to give speeches, to rally support for opening a second front in Europe. Stalin's message was clear. The Soviet Union is bleeding. We're holding the Eastern Front, but we can't do it alone. We need the Allies to invade Western Europe and split German forces. Lyudmila was the messenger. the living proof of Soviet sacrifice and determination. But the American press, they didn't know what to do with her. The New York Times called her the girl sniper. Reporters asked her about makeup, about her uniform, about why her skirt was so long. One reporter criticized her olive green uniform, saying it made her look fat. Another asked, "Can Russian women wear makeup at the front?" The Washington Post ran a column titled "Step-ins for the Amazons," asking why she didn't dress like Joan of Arc in shining armor. Lyudmila was dumbfounded. Just months before, she'd been lying in no man's land, covered in dirt and blood, watching through a rifle scope as men tried to kill her. She'd spent 8 months in Sevastopol watching the city burn, watching her comrades die, watching her husband bleed out from a mortar wound. And these reporters wanted to know about her appearance? "There is no rule against makeup," she said, her voice level. "But who has time to think of her shiny nose when a battle is going on?" Another reporter pressed her about her uniform. Lyudmila's patience snapped. "I wish you could experience a bombing raid. Honestly, you would immediately forget about the cut of your outfit." But Eleanor Roosevelt saw something different. She saw a young woman who'd suffered something universal, something that transcended language and politics. "There is something very charming to me about the young Russian woman, Junior Lieutenant Lyudmila Pavlichenko," Eleanor later wrote. "She has suffered and is suffering something which is universal and binds all the world together regardless of language." They became friends, real friends. For the next several months, Lyudmila toured 43 cities across America, Canada, and Great Britain. She gave hundreds of speeches. She visited factories. She met with union workers. She tried to explain what the Eastern Front was like, what the Soviet people were enduring, why a second front was so desperately needed. In New York, she was presented with a full-length raccoon fur coat by the International Fur and Leather Workers Union. In Toronto, Canada, she was greeted by thousands of people at Union Station. She was presented with a Winchester Model 70 rifle equipped with a Weaver telescopic sight, now displayed in Moscow's Central Armed Forces Museum. The United States government gave her a Colt semi-automatic pistol. In Coventry, England, she accepted 4,569 in donations from factory workers to buy 3 X-ray units for the Red Army. She visited the ruins of Coventry Cathedral, bombed by the Germans. She toured factories that had been converted to war production. And everywhere she went, men asked her the same types of questions, silly questions, questions about fashion and beauty and femininity, until Chicago. By the time the tour reached Chicago, Lyudmila had had enough. She stood before a massive crowd of trade unionists and workers, mostly men, and she decided to stop being polite. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd, "I am 25 years old and I have killed 309 fascist invaders by now." The crowd went silent. "Don't you think, gentlemen, that you have been hiding behind my back for too long?" For a moment, nothing. Complete silence. And then the crowd erupted. Applause, cheers, a roaring wave of support. These were union workers, blue-collar men who understood sacrifice and hard work. And this young woman, this 26-year-old who looked like she should be teaching school, had just called them out for sitting safely in America, while she and the Soviet people bled on the Eastern Front. And they loved her for it. The American folk singer Woody Guthrie was so moved by Lyudmila's story that he wrote a song about her. Miss Pavlichenko. Miss Pavlichenko's well known to fame, Russia's your country, fighting's your game, the whole world. We'll always love you for all time to come. 300 Nazis fell by your gun. Woody Guthrie's guitar bore a famous sticker, "This machine kills fascists." Lyudmila Pavlichenko's rifle had done exactly that, 309 times. After 4 months of touring, Lyudmila returned to the Soviet Union. She'd accomplished her mission. Public support for a second front had grown. The pressure on Allied leaders had increased. Though it would take 2 more years, until D-Day in June 1944, The second front would eventually open. Lyudmila was promoted to major and awarded the Gold Star of the Hero of the Soviet Union, the highest military honor in the country. She received the Order of Lenin twice. She appeared on a Soviet postage stamp in 1943. She was a hero, a legend, the most successful female sniper in history. But she never returned to combat. The Soviet High Command wouldn't risk her. She was too valuable as a symbol. Instead, they made her a sniper instructor. For the rest of the war, from 1942 to 1945, Major Lyudmila Pavlichenko trained the next generation of Soviet snipers. She taught them patience, discipline, how to disappear, how to wait, how to win duels. She taught them how to survive. When the war ended in 1945, Lyudmila Pavlichenko tried to return to the life she'd planned. She went back to Kiev University. She finished her history degree, the one she'd abandoned when Germany invaded in 1941. She became what she'd always wanted to be, a historian. From 1945 to 1953, she worked as a research assistant at the chief headquarters of the Soviet Navy. She became active in the Soviet Committee of the Veterans of War, fighting for the rights and benefits of those who'd served. On the surface, she'd won. She'd survived when 75% of female Soviet snipers had died. She'd become a hero. She'd achieved everything she'd set out to do. But the war hadn't let her go. PTSD, depression, alcoholism. She'd spent months lying in no man's land, living on the edge of death. She'd watched friends die. She'd killed 309 people, many of them at such close range she could see their faces through her scope. She'd lost her husband. She'd been wounded 4 times. The human mind isn't built to endure that and walk away unscathed. In 1957, 15 years after their tour together, Eleanor Roosevelt came to Moscow. The Cold War was in full swing. Tensions between the United States and Soviet Union were at their peak. Eleanor's visit was carefully monitored by Soviet handlers, but Eleanor insisted, demanded really, that she be allowed to visit her friend. Eventually, her request was granted. She was brought to a small 2-room apartment in Moscow where Lyudmila was living. They sat in the front room with the Soviet handler nearby, speaking with cool formality, making polite conversation, discussing safe topics. And then Lyudmila made an excuse and pulled Eleanor into the bedroom. Away from the handler's ears, they embraced. They laughed. They cried. They reminisced about that. Summer in 1942, when they'd toured America together, when Lyudmila had stood before crowds and demanded that men stop hiding behind her back. For a few precious moments, they weren't symbols. They weren't political figures. They were just 2 friends who'd shared something extraordinary. After Eleanor left, Lyudmila continued her quiet life in Moscow. She never talked much about the war. When asked about how she could kill 309 people, she gave her standard answer. If you are going along a road with your child and you see a snake, what do? It wasn't pride. It wasn't boasting. It was simple survival logic. You protect what matters. You do what must be done. But the cost of that survival was still accumulating. By the early 1970s, Lyudmila's health was declining rapidly. The 4 combat wounds, the shrapnel still lodged in her body, the liver damage, the toll of years of depression and alcoholism. Her son, Rostislav, the baby she'd had at 16, the reason she'd worked so hard, the reason she'd fought so fiercely to build a better life, quit his job to care for her full-time. He became her nurse, her caretaker, her companion in those final difficult months. On October 10, 1974, Lyudmila Pavlichenko died of a stroke. She was 58 years old. She died in Rostislav's arms. The USSR had no decent palliative care, no end-of-life support for its veterans. Her death was painful, prolonged. The Germans couldn't kill her on the battlefield, but the war killed her anyway, just slowly. She was buried with full honors in Moscow's Novodevichy Cemetery, her ashes placed in the urn wall. In 1976, 2 years after her death, the Soviet Union issued a second commemorative postage stamp in her honor. Rostislav lived until 2007. He died at age 76 and was buried next to his mother. His daughter, Lyudmila's granddaughter, Elena, is a member of the Artists' Union of Greece. She lives there with her 2 children, carrying on the legacy of a grandmother she barely knew. Today, Lyudmila Pavlichenko holds the record as the deadliest female sniper in history. 309 confirmed kills, 36 enemy snipers, 100 officers. She's among the top military snipers of all time, alongside names like Simo Häyhä, Finland's White Death, and Carlos Hathcock. In 2015, a joint Russian-Ukrainian film called Battle for Sevastopol told her story. It premiered at the Beijing International Film Festival and was screened at Cannes. Her memoirs, Lady Death, were published in English in 2018. Streets are named after her. Museums display her weapons. Historians study her tactics. But here's what's remarkable about Lyudmila Pavlichenko. She never wanted to be a sniper. She wanted to be a teacher, a historian, someone who studied the past, not someone who created it through violence. When Germany invaded, she did what she thought was necessary. She picked up a rifle. She learned to kill. She became the thing the moment demanded, and she was brilliant at it. Not because she loved violence, but because she'd spent years developing the skills that make a perfect sniper: patience, discipline, focus, the ability to endure discomfort, the willingness to do whatever it took to survive. Those weren't military skills. Those were survival skills. Skills she'd learned as a divorced teenage mother working in a factory and studying at night. Skills she'd learned proving to boys at a shooting club that girls could outshoot them. Skills she'd learned raising a child alone while pursuing an education. The Red Army gave her a uniform and training, but life had already made her a survivor. And when you combine survival instinct with military training and natural talent, you get someone who can lie motionless in the dirt for 20 hours, invisible to the enemy, waiting for the perfect shot. You get someone who can win 36 counter-sniper duels without ever losing. You get Lady Death. But there's a darker truth here that we need to talk about. Lyudmila Pavlichenko won every battle, and she lost everything. She lost her husband. She lost her innocence. She lost the ability to sleep peacefully. She lost the life she'd planned, the quiet career as a history teacher, the peaceful existence studying the wars of the past instead of fighting in them. She won the war, but spent the next 32 years dying from it. PTSD, depression, alcoholism, dying at 58 from wounds and trauma that never healed. That's the real cost of war. Not just the soldiers who die on the battlefield, but the ones who survive and spend the rest of their lives haunted by what they had to become. When Eleanor Roosevelt visited her in 1957 and saw the small apartment, the simple life, the weight of memory, she understood something that most people miss. Victory doesn't mean you get your life back. Sometimes survival is its own kind of loss. Lyudmila Pavlichenko killed 309 people to protect her country, her comrades, her son's future. She did what had to be done. But that doesn't mean she walked away whole. So when you hear her story, this incredible tale of a history student who became the deadliest female sniper in history, remember the question she asked when people wondered how she could kill so many. If you are going along a road with your child and you see a snake, what do? You do what's necessary, and then you live with what that necessity cost you. Lyudmila Pavlichenko saved countless Soviet lives. She held the line when the line needed holding. She became a legend. But legends are still human, and humans pay a price for what war demands of them. She died in her son's arms at 58, killed slowly by the war she'd survived. The Germans threatened to tear her into 309 pieces. In the end, the war did exactly that, just not all at once.